Did they seriously just... Ambassador Sarah Chen trailed off, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips as she stared at the holographic broadcast hovering above her desk. Yes, Ambassador. The Galactic Council just executed 50,000 Praxians. Live. On their primary broadcasting network. Her AI assistant's voice carried an unusual note of distress, despite its synthetic nature. Sarah set down her mug with deliberate care. Otherwise, she might have thrown it across the room. Because they refused to give up their art? Technically, Ambassador, the Council classified their creative expressions as dangerous, thought-viral contamination under Regulation 7249B. They killed 50,000 people for writing poetry. The words felt absurd coming out of her mouth, like a bad joke, but the images still flickering above her desk. God, she needed to turn that off. Were decidedly unfunny. The whole thing would have seemed cartoonishly evil if Sarah hadn't spent the last 3 years dealing with the Galactic Council's particular brand of order above all bureaucratic insanity. This was the same governing body that had once attempted to standardize the number of thorns allowed on decorative plants across 17,000 worlds. Because asymmetrical aesthetic experiences promote societal instability. She'd thought that was their rock bottom. Apparently they'd brought mining equipment. Get me the president, now! Sarah stood up, straightening her uniform jacket. And send a priority alert to all Earth diplomatic stations, code black. The president is already holding on encrypted Channel 1, Ambassador. A small window appeared in her field of vision, showing President Helena Martinez's face. She looked as furious as Sarah felt. Tell me you saw that broadcast, Sarah. Every second of it, Madam President. I assume you're calling to tell me we're doing something about this atrocity? The president's expression shifted into something that made Sarah profoundly glad they were on the same side. Oh, we're doing something all right. How would you like to help humanity declare war on the Galactic Council? Sarah felt a shark-like grin spread across her face. I thought you'd never ask. The thing about the Galactic Council that most species never quite grasped was just how boring they were. Not evil boring, like those ancient Earth dystopias where everyone wore gray and spoke in monotone. No, this was bureaucratic boring, the kind of boring that made watching paint dry feel like an action movie. Which was why, when Sarah strode into the Council's main chamber on Centauri Prime exactly 24 hours after the broadcast, most of the assembled representatives barely looked up from their datapads. They were probably debating the optimal length of drinking straws, or something equally vital to galactic stability. Representatives of the Council. Sarah's voice cut through the low murmur of conversation. I come bearing a message from Earth. The Grand Administrator, a tall, spindly being with chrome-plated skin, finally deigned to acknowledge her presence. Earth's concerns have been noted and will be addressed in accordance with Procedure KB 591 subsection... Oh, shut up. The chamber went dead silent. In the Council's 10,000 years of existence, no one had ever told the Grand Administrator to shut up. Sarah was pretty sure there were at least 12 regulations against it. I'm not here to file a complaint or submit a strongly worded letter. She pulled out a small holographic projector and set it on the floor. I'm here to inform you that as of 1 hour ago, Earth has declared war on the Galactic Council. The laughter that followed was exactly what she'd expected. These beings had ruled unchallenged for millennia. The idea that a single world, a relatively new member world at that, would dare to stand against them was literally laughable to them. Sarah waited for the amusement to die down before activating the projector. A massive hologram filled the chamber, showing the Council's precious battle fleet. Or rather, what was left of it. That's a live feed, by the way. Those ships you're seeing get torn apart? That's happening right now in real time. Turns out when you spend 10,000 years focused on regulating everything down to how people are allowed to sneeze, you get a little behind on military innovation. The chamber erupted into chaos. Sarah raised her voice slightly to be heard over the pandemonium. Fun fact about humans. We spent most of our history fighting each other, which means we got really good at it. While you were drafting guidelines about the proper way to fold napkins, we were developing weapons that could crack planets. We just never mentioned it because, well, your regulations said we had to declare all military technology, and we did. We declared everything we had when we joined the Council. Nobody ever asked what we developed after that. The Grand Administrator had turned an interesting shade of gray. This is impossible. Our calculations were wrong. Really, really wrong. Sarah checked her watch. Oh, and you might want to take a look at your orbital defense grid. Right about now. On cue, the massive energy shield protecting Centauri Prime flickered and died. Sarah had to admit the looks of absolute horror on the council members' faces were pretty satisfying. "Here's how this is going to work," she continued, her voice hardening. "You're going to step down. All of you. Every last bureaucrat and pencil pusher who thought they had the right to murder 50,000 people for daring to be creative. Earth will oversee the transition to a new governing body, one that actually respects the rights and dignity of all sapient beings." "And if we refuse?" someone called out. Sarah smiled. Not a nice smile. "Then we'll help ourselves to your chair anyway, and you can explain to your people why their homes are being bombed into oblivion, because you couldn't bear the thought of letting them write poetry." You wouldn't," the Grand Administrator stammered. "Earth signed the non-aggression protocols. You believe in peace." "We do believe in peace. Passionately, in fact. We also believe that sometimes you have to fight for it. And if there's one thing humanity has learned over our long, bloody history, it's that there are some things worth fighting for. Art, music, poetry, the right to think and dream and create. The simple dignity of being allowed to be more than just another cog in your machine." She looked around the chamber, meeting each representative's eyes in turn. "You executed 50,000 people yesterday because they dared to imagine a better world. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" The silence that followed was deafening. "You have 1 hour to make your decision." Sarah turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and just so you know, those ships we destroyed, that was about 2% of our actual fleet. The rest are currently positioned around every major council world, so choose wisely." As she walked out of the chamber, her AI assistant's voice whispered in her ear. "Ambassador, was it strictly necessary to antagonize them quite so much?" Sarah grinned. "Probably not. But after 3 years of sitting through their meetings about proper sock-folding techniques, it felt really, really good." The surrender took exactly 58 minutes. Sarah suspected they would have done it sooner, but there were probably regulations about how quickly you could capitulate to an inferior species. President Martinez's hologram appeared in the chamber right on schedule, looking every bit the leader Earth needed her to be. "Representatives of the former Galactic Council, I trust Ambassador Chen has made our position clear?" The Grand Administrator, now significantly less grand, nodded stiffly. "We accept your terms. The Council will dissolve immediately." "Excellent. And the Praxian survivors?" "Will be released from detention, along with any others being held for similar violations." Sarah felt a fierce surge of satisfaction. The Praxians weren't the only ones who'd suffered under the Council's creativity-suppressing regulations. There were thousands, maybe millions, of beings in detention for the crime of making art, music, or literature that didn't conform to Council standards. "A wise decision." President Martinez's hologram flickered slightly. "Ambassador Chen will oversee the transition. I suggest you give her your full cooperation. She can be quite creative when dealing with obstacles." Sarah didn't bother hiding her smirk as the president's image faded away. She turned to the assembled representatives, most of whom looked like they'd just swallowed something extremely unpleasant. "Right then. Let's start with the immediate release of all prisoners being held for artistic expression. And while we're at it, someone bring me every regulation involving creative restrictions. We're going to have ourselves a little bonfire." But that's against regulation." Someone started to protest. "Not anymore, it's not." Sarah pulled out her personal tablet and started typing. "First order of business. All regulations regarding the regulation of regulations are hereby null and void. See, I can bureaucrat too." As the chamber descended into another round of shocked muttering, Sarah allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. Humanity had just declared war on the greatest power in the galaxy, and won without firing a single shot. Well, okay, maybe a few shots at unmanned ships, but those barely counted. All because some bureaucrats couldn't handle a little poetry. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the newly renamed Chamber of Voices, watching as representatives from across the galaxy filed in for the first meeting of the Galactic Alliance. The chamber itself had been transformed. Gone were the stark, utilitarian designs of the Council era, replaced with a riot of colors and artistic expressions from 100 different worlds. The walls, once blank and sterile, now displayed massive murals painted by recently freed artists. The air was filled with music, actual music, not the mathematically perfect tones the Council had mandated. And the representatives themselves wore clothing that reflected their cultural heritage rather than standardized uniforms. Quite a change, isn't it? A voice beside her made her turn. Caxley, one of the surviving Praxian poets, smiled up at her. The Praxian's iridescent scales shifted through a rainbow of colors, another form of expression the Council had tried to suppress. It's beautiful, Sarah replied honestly. Though I have to admit, some days I miss the old regulation about proper tea-stirring technique. Life felt simpler when I only had to count clockwise stirs. Caxley laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a breeze. I heard you're being considered for leadership council. God, I hope not. I've had enough of politics to last several lifetimes. Sarah watched as more representatives took their seats. Besides, I think the galaxy's had enough of Earth telling everyone what to do. This needs to be a true partnership. Speaking of partnerships, Caxley produced a small book, an actual physical book, bound in something that looked like mother of pearl. The first collection of Praxian poetry to be legally published in over a century. I thought you might like a copy. Sarah accepted the book carefully, running her fingers over its intricate cover. I'd be honored, though I should warn you, my grasp of Praxian metaphors is still pretty shaky. That's the beauty of it, Caxley said softly. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. Looking around the chamber at the explosion of creativity and life that had replaced the council's sterile order, Sarah couldn't help but agree. It wasn't perfect. It was messy and chaotic and sometimes uncomfortable. But it was real. It was alive. And that was worth fighting for. Ambassador? Her AI assistant chimed in. The session is about to begin. Sarah nodded, tucking the book carefully into her jacket pocket. Ready to help build a better galaxy? Caxley's scales rippled with determination. Always. As they took their seats, Sarah reflected that maybe this was humanity's real contribution to the galaxy. Not our weapons or our tactics or even our diplomacy, but our stubborn insistence that life should be more than just following rules. That beauty and chaos and creativity weren't just acceptable, they were essential. The session began with a Praxian poem, its haunting verses echoing through the chamber in defiance of every regulation that had tried to silence it. Sarah closed her eyes and listened, grateful that some things were worth going to war over, even if it meant filling out the paperwork in triplicate. You want to build a what? Sarah stared at the holographic proposal floating above her desk, wondering if her universal translator was malfunctioning. A Creative Commons, Caxley repeated, scales shimmering with excitement. A space station dedicated entirely to artistic expression from across the galaxy. No regulations, no restrictions, just pure creativity. 6 months had passed since Earth's rather dramatic reorganization of galactic governance, and Sarah was starting to think this might have been the easy part. Dismantling a 10,000-year-old bureaucracy? Simple. Teaching dozens of species how to embrace creative freedom after generations of suppression. That was proving interesting. And you want to build it in the former council's central archive? Sarah couldn't help but appreciate the poetic justice. The massive station that had once housed every regulation ever written, becoming a sanctuary for the very things those regulations had tried to suppress. Is there a better place? Caxley's scales rippled with what Sarah had learned to recognize as their equivalent of a mischievous grin. Besides, we've already started converting the regulation storage units into art galleries. Did you know that the complete index of acceptable sneezing procedures makes excellent sculpture material when properly recycled? Sarah's AI assistant chimed in. Ambassador, you should see what they've done with the Committee on Standardized Walking Protocols archived meeting minutes. The origami is quite impressive. Please tell me you took pictures. Better. I helped design the interactive holographic display. It's part of the Bureaucracy Reimagined exhibit opening next week. Sarah leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in amazement. Sometimes she forgot that even AIs had been affected by the Council's creativity restrictions. Her assistant had developed quite the artistic streak since the regulations were lifted. All right, show me the full proposal. And please tell me you figured out how to handle the gravity requirements for the interpretive dance sector. Last time someone tried zero-G ballet, we had to spend 3 days untangling performers from the ventilation system. The hologram expanded, revealing detailed plans for what might be the most ambitious cultural project in galactic history. Each section of the massive station would be dedicated to a different form of artistic expression, with spaces designed to accommodate everything from traditional painting to experimental multi-dimensional sculpture. We've solved the gravity issues, Caxley assured her. The dance sector will have variable gravity fields that can be adjusted for different performance styles. The engineering team actually got the idea from studying Earth's entertainment broadcasts, something called circus acts. Cirque du Soleil in space, Sarah mused. Why not? It's not even the strangest thing I've seen this week. That honor belonged to the Xenon Collective's attempt at interpretive quantum physics through interpersonal resonance harmonics. Sarah still wasn't entirely sure what she'd witnessed, but she'd walked away with a surprisingly thorough understanding of string theory. There is one small complication. Caxley's scales shifted to a more serious hue. We've received some resistance from certain former council members. Of course we have. Sarah rubbed her temples. Let me guess, they're claiming it violates some obscure regulation that we missed during the purge? Actually, they're threatening to form a splinter faction, the Association for Maintained Order and Standardization. Their manifesto is quite something. Apparently, they believe that unrestricted creativity will lead to the collapse of civilized society within 3 generations. Sarah blinked. They wrote a manifesto? Isn't that technically a creative work? I pointed that out. They filed a formal exception request claiming it was procedurally necessary documentation rather than creative expression. Caxley's scales rippled with barely contained amusement. They submitted it in triplicate, naturally. Naturally. Sarah stood up, stretching. Well, I suppose we should deal with this before they start regulating paperclip shapes again. What's their main base of operations? The former Department of Standardized Meditation Practices Complex on Rigel 4. Perfect. Send a message to Earthfleet Command. Tell them I need a ship, preferably one of the more artistic ones. Caxley's scales shifted to a questioning pattern. Artistic ones? Oh yes. After the war, some of our ship designers got a bit creative. Wait until you see what happens when you run the exterior light display through a quantum harmonics filter. It's technically a defense system, but it looks like a cosmic ballet had a baby with a supernova. Is that really necessary? Sarah grinned. Probably not. But if we're going to convince these people that creativity won't destroy the galaxy, we might as well do it with style. The HMS Imagination. Yes, Earth had actually named a warship that. Dropped out of hyperspace above Rigel 4 in what could only be described as a choreographed entrance. The massive vessel's quantum crystalline hull caught the light of 3 suns and transformed it into a cascading display of colors that would have made an aurora borealis look monochrome. Status report, Sarah called from the bridge, trying not to smile too broadly at the reactions they were getting from the surface. According to the sensors, several former council members had already fainted. They're hailing us, Ambassador, her AI assistant reported. The message appears to be formatted according to the old council's emergency protocol template, 7B9. Of course it is. Put them through. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a familiar face, or rather, chrome-plated approximation of a face. The former under-administrator of regulatory compliance looked exactly as Sarah remembered, down to the perpetually disapproving expression. This display is in violation of no fewer than 37 regulations regarding proper spacecraft presentation, he began. Fascinating, Sarah cut him off. I particularly enjoy how the quantum harmonics make it look like the ship is dancing. Did you know we programmed it to respond to music? Watch this. She nodded to her AI assistant, who obligingly began playing classical Earth music through the ship's external speakers. The hull's crystalline structure responded instantly, creating a light show that would have put any laser display to shame. This is... The under-administrator seemed to be having trouble finding the right regulation to cite. Beautiful? Inspiring? A testament to the unlimited potential of creative expression? Sarah suggested helpfully. Or perhaps you'd prefer something more traditional. The music changed to a thundering symphony, and the ship's display shifted accordingly. Several more observers on the surface fainted. You can't do this, the under-administrator protested weakly. There are procedures. Protocols. Actually, Sarah smiled. I think you'll find that Article 17 of the new Galactic Alliance Charter specifically protects the right to artistic expression in all its forms, including, I might add, creative spaceship design. But, the forms, the proper channels, have been filled out, filed, and approved, in triplicate even. We did learn something from you after all. Sarah leaned forward. Now, we can either continue this discussion about regulations that no longer exist, or we can talk about your invitation to the Creative Commons grand opening next month. I hear the Zero-G Sculpture Garden is going to be spectacular. The under-administrator's chrome face went through several interesting contortions. Invitation? Of course. We're converting your old office into a gallery showcasing the evolution of administrative art forms. Did you know that some species consider perfectly aligned paperwork to be a legitimate form of visual art? The Arcturians are particularly fascinated by your filing system. They're creating an entire exhibition around it. They are? Mm-hmm. They're calling it Order in Chaos, the Beauty of Bureaucracy. Very avant-garde. Though personally, I think they might be reading a bit too much into your color-coding system. For several long moments, the under-administrator was silent. Sarah could practically see the gears turning in his chrome-plated head as he tried to process the idea that his life's work might actually be considered art. Would I be permitted to explain the proper context of the filing protocols to these Arcturians? Better than that, Sarah grinned. You could curate the entire exhibition, help them understand the underlying principles, the subtle interplay of form and function. Think of it as a new kind of regulation, one that celebrates order as an art form rather than imposing it as a restriction. The under-administrator's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. That would be acceptable, provided proper documentation is maintained, of course. Of course, I'll have my assistant send over the details. In the meantime, perhaps you'd like a closer look at our ship's display capabilities. The quantum harmonics are particularly impressive when synchronized with Beethoven's Fifth. Even if that voice insisted on documenting everything in triplicate, the grand opening of the Creative Commons was everything Sarah had hoped for, and several things she hadn't quite anticipated. The former Council Archive station had been transformed beyond recognition, its sterile corridors now bursting with color, sound, and occasionally sentient interpretive architecture. Ambassador, you might want to see this. Her AI assistant's voice carried a note of bemusement. The Quantum Art Collective has apparently taught the station's environmental systems how to express themselves. Sarah looked up from her desk, just in time to see a temperature regulation vent perform what appeared to be an enthusiastic interpretation of early Earth jazz. Please tell me they at least maintained basic life support functionality. Oh yes, in fact, efficiency has improved by 27%. Apparently happy environmental systems work better. Though I should note that the waste recycling unit has developed a fondness for opera. Of course it has. Sarah stood, straightening her formal diplomatic attire. The station's official inauguration ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than an hour, and she had a feeling it would be memorable. Status report on our special guests? The former under-administrator and his colleagues arrived 20 minutes ago. They're currently in the bureaucratic arts wing, engaged in what appears to be a heated debate about the aesthetic principles of proper form alignment. And the Praxian delegation? Already in the main amphitheater. Caxley asked me to inform you that they've prepared something special for the opening ceremony. Something about bridging the divide between order and chaos through interpretive resonance. Sarah made her way through the station's winding corridors, each section more spectacular than the last. The zero-G sculpture garden had turned out even better than planned, with pieces that shifted and flowed in response to viewers' emotional states. The multi-species music hall was currently hosting what appeared to be a jam session between a Venusian crystal choir and a group of reformed bureaucrats who had discovered that old regulatory codes could be turned into surprisingly catchy rhythm sequences. But it was the central gallery that took her breath away. The massive space that had once housed the Council's most sacred regulations had been transformed into a sweeping testament to creative freedom. Art from every corner of the galaxy filled the room, each piece telling its own story of suppression and liberation. And in the center, suspended in a shaft of starlight, hung a single crystalline structure. As Sarah approached, she realized it was constructed entirely from recycled regulation datapads, each one containing a fragment of the very laws that had once sought to stamp out creativity. Now they caught and reflected light in endless patterns, turning the instruments of oppression into something beautiful. Impressive, isn't it? A familiar chrome-plated figure stepped up beside her. The under-administrator's voice carried none of its former rigid disapproval. Instead, he sounded thoughtful. We spent so long trying to contain beauty within acceptable parameters. We never realized that the parameters themselves could be beautiful. The Arcturian exhibition has been quite successful, I hear, Sarah remarked, nodding toward a nearby display where visitors were studying the intricate patterns of perfectly organized administrative systems with genuine appreciation. Indeed, though I must admit their interpretation of subsection filing protocols as a metaphor for the interconnectedness of all beings was not entirely what I had intended when I designed the system. Art often takes on meanings beyond its creator's intentions, Sarah smiled. That's part of what makes it powerful. Before the under-administrator could respond, a soft chime echoed through the station. The opening ceremony was about to begin. The main amphitheater was packed with beings from across the galaxy. Former council members sat alongside artists and musicians, their traditional chrome gradually being replaced with more personalized appearances. Sarah spotted one former regulatory official sporting an iridescent finish that would have been grounds for immediate censure just months ago. Caxley took the stage first, their scales shifting through a rainbow of colors. "Welcome to the Creative Commons," they began, voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "1 year ago, we lived in a galaxy where this gathering would have been impossible, where the simple act of creating beauty was considered a crime against order." The Praxian scales settled into a deep, resonant blue. But today, we celebrate not just the freedom to create, but the discovery that order and creativity are not enemies. They are partners in the dance of existence. On cue, the station's environmental systems began a subtle harmonic accompaniment to Caxley's words. Sarah had to admit, for a waste recycling system, it had a surprisingly good sense of dramatic timing. "To demonstrate this truth," Caxley continued, "we have prepared something special. A collaboration between those who once sought to regulate creativity and those who fought to preserve it." The lights dimmed, and the central platform began to glow. Former council members stepped forward, each holding what appeared to be standard regulatory datapads. But as they began to speak, reading from their beloved regulations, something extraordinary happened. Their words, once tools of restriction, became part of a complex harmony. Praxian poets wove their verses between the regulatory citations, transforming stark legal language into something new. The station itself joined in, its systems adding layers of sound and light that turned the performance into a symphony of order and chaos, regulation and freedom. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she watched former enemies create something beautiful together. The under-administrator beside her was perfectly still, but she could see the way the light played across his chrome surface had changed, becoming more complex, more alive. The performance built to a crescendo, regulations and poetry and music blending into a single expression of unity and diversity. As the final notes faded, the silence that followed felt like a prayer. Then slowly someone began to applaud. Others joined in, the sound building until it filled the massive space. Sarah looked around and saw that many were crying, their tears reflecting the starlight that streamed through the station's crystal walls. Later at the reception, Sarah found herself standing with Caxley and the under-administrator, watching as beings from across the galaxy mingled and shared their experiences. "You know," the under-administrator said quietly, "I spent 10,000 years trying to maintain perfect order. I never realized that true order emerges naturally from freedom properly expressed." "There's a regulation for that, actually," Sarah grinned. "Article 1 of the new Galactic Alliance Charter. The right to create shall not be infringed, for in the symphony of free expression, we find our truest harmony." "Written in triplicate?" the under-administrator asked, and Sarah was sure she detected a note of humor in his synthetic voice. "Of course," she replied. "Some traditions are worth keeping." Above them, the station's environmental systems hummed in perfect harmony with the stars, while somewhere in the recycling section, a waste processing unit practiced its scales, and in the grand gallery, the crystal structure made from old regulations continued to spin, catching and reflecting light in endless new patterns, a testament to the truth that humanity had helped the galaxy rediscover, that sometimes the most beautiful order comes from embracing chaos, and that art, in all its forms, is worth fighting for, even if it means filing the paperwork in triplicate. The end.